The silence came without warning. At 0300 hour station time, every radio channel on Earth's orbital relay network turned to static. Then the static stopped too. There was nothing. No hiss, no hum, no signal at all. It was as if someone had reached out and pulled the plug on human communication itself. On board the orbital station Meridian, Commander Elena Voss stood in the communications bay and watched the screens go dark one by one. She had been a soldier for 20 years, and in that time she had seen power failures, solar storms, and enemy jamming. This was none of those things. This was total. Every frequency, every band, every backup channel, all of it gone in the same instant, across the entire planet and every human colony beyond it. "Report," she said, her voice steady even though her hands were not. Lieutenant Marcus Chen sat at the main console, fingers moving fast over controls that no longer did anything useful. "Nothing, Commander. Not local interference. Not a solar flare. This is everywhere. Mars colony, the Titan outpost, the deep space relays past Jupiter. All silent, all at once." "That's not possible," said another officer near the back of the room. "You can't block signals across that much distance instantly. Light itself doesn't move that fast." Elena had already guessed the answer, even before her instruments confirmed it. She had read the reports that came in over the last few months, whispers really, about ships seen at the edge of the solar system that did not match any human design. Long, curved hulls that shimmered like oil on water. Ships that did not answer hails and did not appear on any registry. "It's not distance-based interference," Elena said quietly. "It's something else, something targeted." She was right, though she would not learn the full truth for several days. Far above Earth, past the orbit of Neptune, a fleet of alien warships hung in the black silence of space. They called themselves the Threndel Compact, though no human had ever heard that name spoken aloud. The Compact was old, older than human civilization by tens of thousands of years. They had built an empire across a third of the galaxy by doing one thing very well. They found young, growing civilizations, and they decided, quietly and without cruelty in their own minds, whether those civilizations deserved to keep existing. Most did not pass the test. The Threndel did not believe in slaughter. They found it wasteful and, in their own strange way, distasteful. Instead, they preferred to cut a civilization off from itself. No communication meant no coordination. No coordination meant no unified defense. No organized resistance. No way to call for help that did not exist anyway, since humanity had no allies among the stars. A species cut off from its own voice would panic, fracture, and collapse from the inside. It was, in the eyes of the Threndel High Council, the most merciful way to end a threat before it could grow into something dangerous. And humanity, in the eyes of the Threndel, was dangerous. Fleet Marshal Joran Kest stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vessel of Quiet Judgment, watching the readouts from the jamming array. Every signal humanity could produce, along every wavelength known to the Compact scientists, was being suppressed by a network of relay drones that now surrounded the entire solar system like an invisible net. It had taken years of quiet preparation to place them all without being noticed. Now the net was closed. "Confirmation," said his second-in-command, a lean officer named Dessa Vrail. "All human transmission capability has been neutralized. Radio, laser communication, even their primitive wired networks that connect through their planet's surface, nothing gets in or out." "Good," Joran said. "Now we watch. Give them a week, maybe two. Let them tear themselves apart trying to figure out what happened. Species like this always do. They panic. They blame each other. Their governments turn against their own people looking for someone to punish. By the time we arrive to make first contact, there will be little left to resist us." Dessa hesitated before speaking again. "Marshal, our scans of this species, they are unusual. Their weapons technology is primitive compared to ours, yes, but their adaptability is high. Some of the historical records we gathered show that this species does not always break under pressure the way our models predict. In some cases, they grow more organized, not less." Joran waved a hand, unconcerned. "All primitive species believe they are exceptional right up until they are not. We have done this 100 times, Dessa. It works every time. Trust the process." Dessa said nothing more, but she kept watching the data long after the Marshal had turned his attention elsewhere. Back on Earth, the silence spread like a slow-moving disaster. Within hours, news anchors were reporting on air, with nothing but old recorded footage, because no live feeds could reach the studios from anywhere outside the building. Within a day, governments around the world began scrambling emergency meetings, trying to understand why every satellite had gone dark, why every long-distance phone call failed, why the internet itself, which relied on satellites and undersea cables and radio towers working together, had crumbled into disconnected local islands. At first, people believed it was a cyber attack. Then they believed it was some kind of massive technical failure, a cascading collapse of infrastructure nobody had thought to prepare for. It took nearly 3 full days before enough scientists, working with what limited tools they still had, pieced together the truth. This was not a malfunction. This was not an attack from any human enemy. Something outside the world had done this, deliberately, and with a precision that suggested planning far beyond anything humanity was capable of. Commander Elena Voss was among the first to reach that conclusion, and among the first to act on it. The Meridian station orbited Earth at an altitude where it could still observe the planet below, and Elena had spent the last 3 days doing something the Threndel did not expect. She had stopped trying to fix the communication system, and started trying to understand what had broken it. "Chen, pull up everything we have on unusual energy readings from the last 6 months, she said, standing over his shoulder as he worked. Anything strange, anything that didn't match a known source. Chen scrolled through old logs, most of them routine, until he stopped on an entry from 4 months earlier. Here, a deep space telescope picked up a faint gravitational anomaly near the orbit of Neptune. Analysts at the time labeled it as sensor error, and moved on. But look at the shape of the reading. Elena studied the data. It was subtle, almost invisible in the noise, but it was there, a faint ripple, repeating at regular intervals, consistent with something large moving in a controlled pattern, rather than a natural phenomenon. "That's not sensor error," she said. "That's a ship, or several ships, and if they were out there 4 months ago, quietly getting into position, then this wasn't a sudden event," Chen finished. "It was planned. Somebody's been watching us, waiting." Elena felt a cold certainty settle over her, the kind she had only felt a few times in her career, moments right before everything changed. If they wanted to invade, they would have already done it. This isn't an invasion. This is a test. They cut off our voice to see what we'd do without it. "So what do we do?" Elena looked around the room at her small crew. Engineers, technicians, a handful of soldiers assigned to the station for security. None of them were trained for first contact with an alien civilization. None of them had ever imagined they would need to be. "We do what humans have always done when someone tries to silence us," she said. "We find another way to speak. Spirik." It was not an easy answer. The jamming, whatever it was, blocked every conventional method of communication humanity possessed. But Elena had spent her career studying old military history, the kind of history that predated satellites and radio, back when humans communicated across long distances using nothing but light, mirrors, flags, and eventually, simple pulses of laser light that did not rely on the broad spectrum frequencies the enemy seemed to be jamming. "Chen, do we still have the experimental laser array, the one from the deep space communication trials 2 years ago?" Chen's eyes widened. "The tight beam system? It's still installed, but it was never fully tested. It only works if you know exactly where to point it, and it can only talk to one receiver at a time." "That's fine," Elena said. "We don't need to talk to everyone. We need to talk to someone. If we can get one clear signal out to the Mars colony, or to any of our deep space assets, then we know it's possible. And if it's possible for us, it's possible for every other station and colony we have. We just need to figure out the pattern and share it, carefully, quietly, one relay at a time." It took 2 more days of careful work. The tight beam laser system, originally built for scientific experiments rather than emergency communication, was not designed for this kind of use. Chen and his small engineering team stripped it down, rebuilt its targeting software from scratch, and ran calculations by hand when the station's main computer proved too slow for the precision required. Elena did not sleep more than a few hours at a stretch during that time. She spent most of it staring at old star charts, trying to work out where the Mars colony would be in its orbit, accounting for the time delay of light itself. On the third day, they were ready. If this works, Chen said, his hand hovering over the activation control, we'll know within about 12 minutes, once the signal reaches Mars and a response comes back. And if it doesn't work, then we try again, and again. Until it does. Elena nodded. Send it. The laser fired a tight, narrow beam of coded light across the gulf of space between Earth and Mars, carrying with it a short, careful message. This is Commander Elena Voss, Earth Orbital Station Meridian. All standard communication has failed. We believe this is not accidental. If you receive this, respond using the same method. Do not use standard radio. They are listening. 12 minutes and 40 seconds later, a faint return signal reached the Meridian's receiver. It was weak, and it took several attempts to properly decode, but when the message finally resolved on Chen's screen, the entire communications bay went silent in a very different way than before. Received. Mars colony confirms total communication blackout on our end as well. We thought it was equipment failure, thought we were alone, standing by for instructions. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling something like relief mixed with a grim kind of determination. They were not alone. And if two human outposts, separated by tens of millions of kilometers, could find a way to speak to each other without the enemy noticing, then perhaps this silence was not the weapon the Threndel believed it to be. Far out past Neptune, aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, Fleet Marshal Joran Kest reviewed the daily reports from his monitoring drones with satisfaction. Human infrastructure showed clear signs of strain, governments were struggling, panic, as predicted, was spreading through the population. Everything was proceeding according to the pattern his species had followed successfully for thousands of years. He did not know about the laser. He did not know that a narrow beam of light, invisible to his broad-spectrum sensors, that were tuned to detect radio and standard communication frequencies, had already crossed the gap between two human worlds. He did not know that a woman on a small orbital station had just planted the first seed of a resistance his people had no model to predict. Desavrail, still quietly reviewing the data from her post, noticed something odd in the sensor logs, a flicker of unexplained energy near Earth's orbit, gone almost as soon as it appeared. She flagged it for further review, but the system classified it as background noise, not worth the Marshal's attention. She filed the report anyway. Something about this species still did not sit right with her, and she had learned long ago to trust that feeling. On the Meridian, Elena Voss stood before her small crew, all of them gathered in the communications bay, watching the message from Mars glowing steady on the screen. Outside the station's windows, Earth turned slowly below them, its cities dark in patches, where power grids had failed, without the coordination that modern infrastructure depended on. It was a wounded world, but it was not a defeated one. They wanted to cut off our voice, Elena said, looking around at the tired, determined faces of her crew. They thought that would be enough to break us. They don't understand something about us yet. We don't need a voice to fight. We just need a reason. She turned back to the screen, to the faint signal from Mars, the first thread of a network that would soon stretch further than anyone, human or alien, could have predicted. Send this to every station we can reach, she said. Tell them the plan. Tell them to stay quiet, stay patient, and start building. If they want silence, we'll give them silence, right up until the moment we decide to break it. On our terms, not theirs. Chen began typing, encoding the next message into the laser system, aiming it now not toward Mars, but toward a distant relay station near Jupiter, the next link in a chain that would grow, quietly and carefully, over the days to come. None of them knew yet how large that chain would become, or what it would eventually be capable of. They only knew that the enemy, whoever they were, had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that taking away humanity's voice would take away its will to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 2 weeks after the silence fell, humanity had built something the Threndel Compact did not know existed. A second network, quiet and invisible, running underneath the ruins of the first. It started small. A laser link between Earth and Mars, then a second link from Mars to the mining outpost near the asteroid belt, then a third, reaching all the way out to the research station orbiting Titan. Each link was slow. Each message took minutes, sometimes hours, to cross the distance between the stars and planets involved. But it worked, and more importantly, it was invisible to the enemy's sensors, which were built to detect broad radio signals, not narrow beams of coded light, aimed with careful precision at a single point in space. Commander Elena Voss had become, without ever asking for the role, the center of that network. Messages flowed through the Meridian station from every direction, carried by hand-built laser rigs that engineers across human space had assembled from spare parts, old equipment, and no small amount of desperate creativity. She read every report that came in, cross-checked it against what little else they knew, and sent back instructions as best she could. What she read painted a picture that worried her more than the silence itself. On Earth, the loss of communication had done real damage. Financial systems that depended on instant data transfer had frozen. Supply chains that relied on coordination between distant factories and ports had broken down. In some cities, without the constant flow of information people had grown used to, fear had turned into unrest. There had been riots in 3 major cities within the first week. Governments, unable to coordinate with each other or sometimes even with their own regional offices, had made decisions in isolation that sometimes contradicted each other and made things worse. It was exactly what the Threndel had predicted, a civilization cut off from its own voice, tearing itself apart from the inside. But it was not the whole story. Because while the panic spread through the cities, something else was happening in the quiet corners of human civilization that no alien observer, watching only for chaos, would have thought to look for. Small groups of engineers, soldiers, and ordinary people who simply refused to give up had begun finding each other. Ham radio operators, who had spent years as a hobby learning to communicate using low-power, unconventional methods, discovered that some of their oldest techniques, Morse code sent over very low frequencies, physical relay by courier, even old naval semaphore flag systems dusted off from museum displays, were not being blocked at all. The Threndel jamming was sophisticated, but it was designed to catch modern, high-bandwidth communication. It had never been designed with the idea that humans might fall back on methods 100 years old, methods too simple and too slow for the compact's monitoring systems to bother filtering. Elena learned about this development from a message that took nearly 6 hours to reach her, relayed by 3 separate laser links, and finally handed to her as a printed page by Lieutenant Chen, who read it aloud, because the sender had insisted on writing it that way, in the same spirit as the old methods they were describing. Commander, this is Master Sergeant Reyes, Ground Forces Liaison, North American Command. We have made contact with a network of civilian radio operators who never stopped broadcasting on old low-frequency bands. The enemy jamming does not seem tuned to catch these signals. We believe this is because our jamming was designed based on our modern infrastructure, not our full history of communication methods. Recommend immediate effort to identify and organize any and all pre-digital communication capacity still in existence. Old is now new. Please advise. Elena read the message twice, then allowed herself something she had not done in 2 weeks. She smiled. Chen, she said, get me everything we have on historical communication technology. Radio operators, old telegraph lines, anything from before the satellite era that might still function, and find out if any of our university archives kept working models or replicas. You think we can build an entire secondary infrastructure out of 100-year-old technology? Chen asked, though he was already moving to comply. I think, Elena said, that whoever is out there jamming us studied our current technology very carefully. I don't think they studied our history at all, and that is a mistake we are going to make them regret. Far above, aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, Fleet Marshal Joran Kest was beginning to feel the first faint stirrings of doubt, though he would not have admitted it, even to himself. His monitoring drones reported the expected chaos on Earth, the riots, the failing infrastructure, the fractured governments. All of that matched the pattern from 100 prior conquests, but there were other reports, smaller ones, that did not fit as neatly. Strange, faint energy signatures near several of humanity's off-world colonies, gone before the drones could fully analyze them. Occasional bursts of extremely low-frequency radio waves from Earth's surface, using patterns that did not match any modern communication protocol in the compact's extensive database, and were therefore dismissed by the automated systems as background noise or equipment malfunction. Dessa Vrail, still diligently reviewing every scrap of data that came through, began to notice a pattern in what was being dismissed. She brought her concerns to the Marshal personally, standing at attention in his private quarters aboard the flagship. Marshal, I believe we may be underestimating this species' ability to adapt, she said. The anomalies I flagged 3 weeks ago have not stopped. They have increased in frequency, though each one remains individually too faint, or too brief, for our systems to classify as a genuine threat. I believe humanity may be developing an alternate communication network using methods outside the scope of our jamming design. Yoren considered this for a long moment before responding. Every species we have studied clings to what they know. Humans built their civilization on radio, on satellites, on digital networks. Without those tools, they are like a bird with clipped wings. They may flap and struggle, but they cannot truly fly. With respect, Marshall, humans are not birds. Their historical records show a pattern I find troubling. Every time this species has faced a barrier, technological or otherwise, they have found a way around it, often using tools or ideas that seemed obsolete or unimportant until the moment they were needed. I do not think we should assume their current technology represents the limit of their capability. Yoren studied his second-in-command for a long moment. Dessa had served with him for over 100 years, through a dozen successful campaigns. She was not given to unfounded caution. "What would you have me do?" he asked finally. "Increase our sensor sensitivity to include historical and low-technology communication methods, and consider accelerating our timeline. If they are building something, I would rather we act before it is finished than after." Yoren was quiet for a moment, weighing the years of successful precedent against the instincts of an officer he trusted. In the end, old habits won out over new doubts. "The pattern has held for thousands of years, Dessa. I will authorize expanded sensor sweeps, but I see no reason to abandon our timeline. 2 more weeks. Then we begin the approach and offer them the terms of submission, once they are sufficiently weakened. If your concerns prove accurate, we will adjust." Dessa saluted and withdrew, though the uneasy feeling in her chest did not go away. Back on Earth, the recovery of old technology was moving faster than anyone expected, driven by a simple truth. Humanity had never fully thrown away its past. Museums held working replicas of early telegraph systems. Universities had preserved old ham radio equipment for educational purposes. Retired engineers who had grown up before the digital age were suddenly among the most valuable people alive, called out of retirement to teach soldiers and volunteers how to build and operate equipment most young people had only ever seen in history books. In a repurposed warehouse outside what had once been Chicago, a woman named Dr. Amara Solis led a team of volunteers, assembling a network of low-frequency radio towers, using parts scavenged from old broadcasting equipment, hobbyist radio kits, and even some components pulled from decommissioned military hardware. Amara had spent 30 years as a professor of electrical engineering, teaching students about technologies she had always assumed were relics of the past. Now those relics were the only thing standing between her species and total isolation. "We're not going to match the range or speed of what we lost," she told her team, standing before a whiteboard covered in calculations. "But we don't need to match it. We need reliability. We need something the enemy isn't watching for. Every tower we build is another voice they can't silence." The work was slow and difficult. Old equipment failed. Volunteers with no formal training made mistakes that had to be fixed. But piece by piece, a new network began to take shape, connecting cities that had been isolated from each other, then connecting to the laser relay system that Elena's team had built in orbit, creating a strange but effective hybrid of century-old radio technology and cutting-edge laser communication, held together by nothing more than human stubbornness and ingenuity. 3 weeks after the silence began, Elena received a message that changed everything about how she understood their situation. It came from a military research station in the mountains of Central Asia, relayed through 6 separate links before it finally reached her. "Commander Voss, this is Dr. Wen Liu, Chief Scientist, Kunlun Research Facility. We have been analyzing the characteristics of the jamming signal, using old-style spectrum analyzers that were kept in storage as historical equipment. We believe the jamming originates from a network of small relay drones positioned throughout the solar system, rather than from the alien ships themselves. If this is correct, the drones may have limited processing power and may rely on a centralized control signal from the main fleet to coordinate their jamming pattern. If we could disrupt that control signal, even briefly, we might be able to identify the drones' exact positions and potentially disable them." Elena read the message 3 times, feeling the shape of a plan begin to form in her mind, one that went beyond simply working around the enemy's silence, toward the possibility of breaking it entirely. She called a meeting that night, gathering the leaders of the growing resistance network through the laser relay system, their voices delayed and their images grainy, but present nonetheless, for the first time since the silence began, in something like a real conversation. "We've spent 3 weeks learning to speak without being heard," Elena said, looking at the faces gathered on her screen. Faces from Mars, from the asteroid belt, from research stations scattered across the solar system, and from military command centers on Earth itself. Dr. Liu believes we can do more than that. She believes we can find a way to strike back at the source of this jamming. I want to hear from every one of you. Is this something we can actually attempt, or is it too dangerous? There was a long pause on the line, filled with the soft static of a dozen relay stations passing the silence back and forth. Finally, Master Sergeant Reyes spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a soldier who had spent 3 weeks watching his own people struggle under the weight of an enemy they could not see or fight directly. "Commander, with respect, I think it's more dangerous to do nothing. Whoever is out there has been sitting back for 3 weeks watching us suffer, waiting for us to break. I say we give them a reason to worry instead." One by one, the others agreed. It was not a unanimous decision made easily. There were real fears about the risk of provoking an enemy whose full strength remained unknown, about the danger of drawing attention to a resistance network that had only just begun to take shape. But beneath those fears was something stronger, a shared refusal to simply wait and hope for mercy from an enemy who had already shown none. Elena closed the meeting with a simple directive. "Dr. Liu, continue your analysis. I want a full plan on how we might locate and disrupt this drone network within the week. Everyone else, keep building, keep connecting. The more of us who can talk to each other, the harder we will be to break, no matter what happens next." As the connections closed one by one, Elena remained alone in the communications bay, looking out at the dark shape of Earth turning slowly below her. 3 weeks ago, she had watched the lights of human communication go dark, one screen at a time, and had felt something close to despair. Now, watching the faint, scattered signals of her growing network blink quietly across her monitors, she felt something different. Somewhere out past Neptune, an alien fleet marshal believed he was watching a dying civilization collapse under the weight of its own silence. He had no idea that the silence he had created was becoming something else entirely, the foundation of a resistance built from old radio waves, careful lasers, and the simple, stubborn refusal of an entire species to stop finding ways to speak to each other. The Threndel Compact had studied humanity's technology carefully. They had studied its weapons, its cities, its digital infrastructure. What they had not studied, what perhaps no outside observer could have fully understood, was humanity's history of solving problems with whatever tools happened to be at hand, no matter how old or how strange those tools might seem. That oversight was about to cost them more than they could yet imagine. Dr. Wen Liu's plan took shape over the course of 5 days, built from data gathered by the strange hybrid network of old radio equipment and modern laser relays that now stretched across human space. It was not a simple plan, and it was not without risk, but by the end of the 5th day, Elena Voss had a working outline of how humanity might finally strike back at an enemy that had, until now, remained completely invisible. The jamming, Dr. Liu explained during a long relayed briefing that took nearly a full day to complete due to the slow speed of the laser network, came from a web of small drones scattered throughout the solar system. Each drone was relatively simple, designed to broadcast interference across every known human communication frequency, but too small to carry its own independent power source, capable of running indefinitely. Instead, the drones drew power and coordination from a central signal, likely broadcast from the main alien fleet somewhere beyond Neptune. "If we can locate the source of that central signal," Dr. Liu explained, her voice carrying clearly, despite the delay and static of the relay chain, "we may be able to disrupt it, even briefly. If the drones lose their coordinating signal, even for a short time, they may default to a less effective, individual jamming pattern, which would create gaps we could exploit. More importantly, disrupting that signal would tell us something we don't currently know, exactly where the enemy fleet is hiding." Elena listened carefully, turning the plan over in her mind. looking for the flaws that could get people killed. And how do you propose we disrupt a signal coming from a fleet we've never seen, using technology we don't understand? We don't disrupt it with technology, Dr. Liu said. We disrupt it with old-fashioned brute force. Every signal, no matter how advanced, still has to travel through space. If we can identify roughly where the source is located, even a low-tech method like a focused burst of electromagnetic interference, generated by something as simple as a modified industrial reactor, could create enough local noise to disrupt their control signal in that specific area, at least for a short time. It was Master Sergeant Reyes who spoke next, his voice carrying the practical concerns of a soldier rather than a scientist. That sounds like it requires getting a ship close enough to their fleet to matter, which means putting people in danger, possibly right in the path of an alien war fleet we know almost nothing about. Yes, Elena said simply. It does. There was a long pause on the line. Then we need volunteers, Reyes said finally. And we need a plan that gives them the best possible chance of coming back. Over the next several days, the pieces came together. A single ship, one of the last remaining deep space vessels humanity had built before the silence fell, was quietly refitted for the mission. It was not a warship. It had been designed years earlier for asteroid mining operations far beyond Mars, built for endurance and cargo capacity rather than speed or combat. But it had one advantage that made it perfect for the task. It was already equipped with a powerful industrial fusion reactor, originally intended to power heavy mining equipment, that could be modified to generate a massive, focused burst of electromagnetic interference. The ship was called the Wanderer's Hope, and its refit took place in secret, in a hidden shipyard built into a hollowed-out asteroid that had never been part of any official registry, a facility that existed specifically because a previous generation of engineers had once worried about exactly this kind of emergency and had quietly prepared for it, just in case. Captain Diego Ortiz, a veteran deep space pilot with more than 15 years of experience navigating the dangerous stretches beyond Mars, volunteered to command the mission. He had spent most of his career hauling ore and supplies through the asteroid belt, a job that required patience, precision, and a calm head under pressure, qualities that would serve him well for what was about to come. I've flown through debris fields that would tear apart most military ships, Ortiz told Elena during their final briefing, his voice steady over the laser relay. I can get close to their fleet without being seen. Getting away afterward, that's the part I'm less sure about. You don't have to do this alone, Elena reminded him. You'll have a crew, and we're sending everything we can to support you. I know, Ortiz said, but someone has to fly the ship, and I'd rather it be someone who already knows how to survive out there. The Wanderer's Hope launched 11 days after the silence began, slipping quietly away from its hidden shipyard, under the cover of a carefully planned trajectory that avoided the known patrol patterns of the alien jamming drones. Its small crew, 5 people in total, carried with them a modified reactor core, capable of generating a burst of interference powerful enough to disrupt communication across a significant portion of local space, at least for a short window of time. Their destination was a region of space Dr. Liu's team had identified through careful analysis of the jamming pattern's subtle variations, a location past Neptune's orbit where the interference seemed strongest and most consistent, suggesting it was close to the source. The journey took 9 days. Aboard the ship, the crew lived in near-total silence themselves, running on minimal power to avoid detection, communicating with each other only through hand signals and written notes when possible, saving even their voices for moments when speech was truly necessary. It was a strange, tense kind of existence, made stranger by the knowledge that somewhere ahead of them, an alien fleet capable of ending their species without a second thought was waiting, unaware that they were coming. On the 9th day, Captain Ortiz brought the Wanderer's Hope to a stop at the edge of what their sensors, adapted from old astronomical equipment that had not been part of the enemy's target list, identified as the strongest point of the jamming signal. This is it, he said quietly to his crew, gathered around the ship's small bridge. Once we activate the reactor burst, they'll know something happened, even if they don't know exactly what or where. We'll have a small window before their systems compensate. Whatever we're going to learn, we need to learn it fast. The crew took their positions. Dr. Amara Solis, who had insisted on joining the mission personally despite her lack of military experience, sat at the modified sensor array, ready to capture whatever data the interference burst might reveal about the enemy fleet's location and composition. "On my mark," Ortiz said, his hand hovering over the activation control, the same kind of moment Elena had faced weeks earlier when she first activated the laser system that started this entire quiet resistance. 3, 2, 1. He activated the reactor burst. For a fraction of a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ship's sensors lit up with readings unlike anything they had seen before. A massive cluster of energy signatures, previously hidden by the enemy's own jamming, suddenly visible in the brief window created by the interference burst. Dozens of ships, arranged in a precise formation, their true positions and approximate sizes, captured for the first time by human instruments. "We've got them," Dr. Solis said, her voice tight with excitement and fear in equal measure. "I'm reading at least 40 vessels, possibly more. Recording everything." Aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, the sudden burst of interference sent a ripple of alarm through the fleet's monitoring systems. Dessa Vrail, who had never stopped watching the anomalous data streams even after the Marshal's dismissal weeks earlier, was the first to notice. "Marshal, we have an unidentified energy discharge near our fleet's position. It briefly disrupted local sensor and communication function across several of our support drones." Joran Kest, roused from his quarters by the alert, arrived on the bridge within minutes, his usual calm confidence replaced by something sharper. "Source? Unknown. The discharge pattern is unlike anything in our records. It does not match any weapon or technology we associate with this species' known capabilities. If I had to guess, Marshal, I would say it was improvised. A crude but effective method of generating localized interference, likely using conventional industrial technology rather than a purpose-built weapon." Joran studied the readings himself, his expression darkening as he processed what this meant. A crude improvised weapon, created from ordinary technology, had managed to briefly disrupt a portion of his fleet's coordination network, something no purpose-built weapon from any prior conquered species had ever managed to do. "They found us," he said quietly. "Somehow, despite everything, they found us." "It appears so, Marshal," Dessa said. "And if they were able to locate our position, even briefly, it is likely they gathered detailed information about our fleet's composition and disposition during the disruption window." Joran was silent for a long moment, the weight of 100 successful campaigns suddenly feeling less certain than it had that morning. "Increase our defensive perimeter, double the number of jamming drones in this sector, and Dessa, prepare a full combat readiness report. I want to know exactly what this fleet is capable of if this species decides to do something more than gather information." "Understood, Marshal. And the timeline for our approach to Earth?" Joran considered this carefully. The old pattern, the one that had worked so reliably for thousands of years, told him to continue waiting, to let the isolation do its work, to trust that no species could organize an effective resistance while cut off from itself. But the evidence in front of him told a different story, one his species had perhaps never fully encountered before. "We accelerate," he said finally. "I want the fleet ready to begin our approach within 5 days, not 2 weeks. If this species is finding ways to fight back faster than our models predict, then we cannot afford to give them more time than necessary." Aboard the Wanderer's Hope, Captain Ortiz guided the ship carefully away from the enemy fleet's position, running dark and quiet, watching his sensors for any sign of pursuit. None came, at least not immediately, and slowly, cautiously, the crew allowed themselves to believe they might actually make it home with what they had learned. "We need to get this data back to Commander Voss as fast as possible," Dr. Solis said, still reviewing the readings captured during the brief window of exposed enemy positions. "This is more than just their location. Look at this pattern here, in their formation. Their ships aren't arranged like ours would be. Everything is centered around what looks like a single command vessel, larger than the rest, positioned at the heart of the formation. Every other ship's movement pattern seems to correlate directly with signals coming from that central point." Ortiz frowned, studying the data over her shoulder. "You're saying their whole fleet depends on one ship?" "I'm saying it looks that way," Dr. Solis said, which would explain how they were able to coordinate the jamming drones across our entire solar system so precisely. If they truly are relying on a centralized command structure, that's not just a communication network we're looking at. That might be their single greatest vulnerability. 9 days later, after a careful, quiet journey back through the solar system, the Wanderer's Hope returned to its hidden shipyard, its crew exhausted but alive, carrying with them information that would change the entire shape of humanity's resistance. Elena Voss received the full data transfer through the laser relay network within hours of the ship's return, staying awake long into the night, reviewing every detail, alongside Dr. Liu and Dr. Solis, both of whom had joined the call despite their exhaustion, unwilling to rest until Elena had seen everything they had found. A centralized command vessel, Elena repeated, studying the formation data on her screen. If we can find a way to disrupt that ship specifically, even temporarily, it wouldn't just create a gap in their jamming, it could throw their entire fleet into confusion. That's the theory, Dr. Liu confirmed. But disrupting one ship in the middle of an entire alien battle fleet is a very different challenge than what the Wanderer's Hope just accomplished. We'd need something far more precise and far more dangerous. Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking at the image of the alien formation, the neat, confident arrangement of ships that had spent weeks believing humanity was too broken and too isolated to ever pose a real threat. Then we'd better start figuring out how, she said. Because Marshal Kest, or whoever is leading that fleet, is not going to wait for us much longer. We just showed him we're more dangerous than he thought, which means we're running out of time before he decides to stop watching and start acting. Outside the window of the communications bay, Earth continued its slow, steady turn below the Meridian station, its cities scarred but still standing, its people still fighting, in ways both large and small, against a silence that had once seemed absolute. That silence was beginning to crack. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Neptune, an alien fleet marshal was beginning to understand, for the first time in his long career, what it truly meant to underestimate humanity. 5 days after the Wanderer's Hope returned with its precious data, the Threndel fleet began its approach toward Earth. Elena Voss learned of this development from a chain of hastily built early warning sensors that Dr. Liu's team had scattered across the outer solar system in the days following the mission. Simple devices built from old astronomical equipment, designed to detect exactly the kind of energy signature a moving alien fleet would produce. "They're coming faster than we expected," Dr. Liu reported during an emergency briefing, her voice tight with urgency. "At their current speed and trajectory, they will reach Earth's orbital defenses within 8 days. 8 days. It was not enough time to build a proper fleet. Not enough time to train soldiers for a kind of warfare no human had ever faced. Not enough time to do almost anything that traditional military planning would demand. But Elena had learned over the past month that traditional planning was no longer the tool that would save them. "Then we don't have 8 days to prepare a conventional defense," she said, looking around at the faces gathered through the laser relay network, faces that had grown more numerous and more determined with each passing week. "We have 8 days to execute the plan Dr. Solis identified. If their fleet truly depends on a single centralized command vessel, that ship is our target, not their weapons, not their numbers, just that one point of failure." Master Sergeant Reyes, who had been quietly coordinating with military commands across the remaining functional governments of Earth, spoke next. "Commander, even if we manage to disrupt their command ship, we're still talking about a fleet of at least 40 vessels, bearing down on a planet with almost no functioning orbital defense fleet of our own. Disrupting their coordination might buy us time, but it won't stop them from simply firing on us the moment they're close enough." "It might not stop them," Elena agreed, "but it might slow them down enough and confuse them enough that we can make the fight far harder and far more costly than they expect. And if there's one thing we've learned about this enemy in the past month, it's that they built their entire strategy around the assumption that we would be too broken to resist. Every time that assumption has proven wrong, they've had to change their plans. I intend to make them change their plans one more time." The next 8 days were the most intense of the entire crisis. Every resource humanity could quietly gather was funneled toward a single goal: building a weapon capable of disrupting the Threndel command vessel at the critical moment of the coming battle. Dr. Solis, working with a team of engineers scattered across 3 continents and coordinated entirely through the slow, careful laser relay network, designed a device based on the same principle that had worked for the Wanderer's Hope, but refined and focused into something far more precise. Rather than a single large burst of interference, the new device, which the team began calling the Silencer, was designed to generate a continuous, tightly focused beam of disruptive energy, capable of being aimed directly at a specific target rather than spreading its effect across a wide area. If we can get this device close enough to their command ship and maintain the beam for even a short period, Dr. Solis explained during one of the final briefings before the fleet's arrival, we believe it will overload their local communication and coordination systems, effectively cutting their command ship off from the rest of their fleet, just as they cut us off from each other. Building the device was only part of the challenge. Delivering it required a ship capable of getting close enough to the Threndel command vessel during the chaos of battle to make the weapon effective, and surviving long enough to actually use it. Captain Ortiz, still recovering from the exhaustion of the Wanderer's Hope mission, volunteered again without hesitation. "I know that fleet's formation better than anyone alive right now," he told Elena. "I've studied every angle of that data 100 times. If anyone has a chance of getting close enough to that command ship, it's someone who already knows exactly where it sits in that formation." Elena did not want to send him back into danger so soon, but she also understood the truth of what he was saying. There was no time to train someone else, no time to study the data as thoroughly as Ortiz already had. In the end, she agreed, on the condition that he would have support this time, not just from his own small crew, but from every ship humanity could quietly gather in the days remaining before the Threndel fleet arrived. It was not a large force. In the chaos of the past month, most of humanity's military space assets had been scattered, isolated by the same silence that had cut off everything else. But piece by piece, ship by ship, a small defense fleet came together, in the days before the battle, gathered secretly in the shadow of the moon, where the Threndel sensors, still calibrated primarily to detect modern communication rather than physical objects moving quietly through space, were less likely to notice them in time. It numbered only 17 ships in total, a mix of repurposed cargo vessels, a handful of genuine military craft that had survived the initial chaos, and even a few private spacecraft whose owners had volunteered without hesitation once they learned what was at stake. It was nothing compared to the 40 vessels of the Threndel fleet, but it was more than anyone had believed possible only a month earlier, when the silence first fell, and hope had seemed like the first casualty of the invasion. On the 8th day, the Threndel fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's orbital defenses. Fleet Marshal Joran Kest stood on the bridge of the Vessel of Quiet Judgment, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on his view screen, still troubled by the events of the past week, but confident that his fleet's overwhelming advantage in numbers and technology would carry the day, regardless of whatever small resistance this stubborn species might attempt. "Report on planetary defenses," he said. Dessa Vrail, standing at her post beside him, studied the readings carefully. "Minimal, Marshal. We detect a small cluster of vessels near the planet's moon, 17 in total, none matching the profile of a genuine warship class. Weapons capability appears limited. I would estimate this poses no significant threat to our fleet. And their jamming countermeasures? None detected beyond what we already know. Our jamming network remains fully effective across all standard communication bands." Joran allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction at this news, though the memory of the strange interference burst from the week before still lingered uncomfortably in the back of his mind. "Then we proceed as planned. Move the fleet into standard formation around the planet. Once in position, we will offer them the opportunity to submit peacefully, as is our custom. If they refuse, we will begin more direct measures." The Threndel fleet moved into position, with the precise, practiced coordination of a species that had conducted this same maneuver 100 times before, across 100 different worlds. 40 ships arranged themselves in a wide, encircling formation around Earth, every movement synchronized through the constant flow of coordination signals from the Vessel of Quiet Judgment at the formation's center. It was exactly the formation Dr. Solis had predicted, exactly the vulnerability her analysis had identified. Aboard the Wanderer's Hope, now flying at the head of humanity's small, desperate defense fleet, Captain Ortiz watched the Threndel formation take shape on his sensors, his hands steady despite the enormity of what was about to happen. "There," he said quietly, pointing to the largest vessel at the heart of the alien formation. "That's their command ship, just like the data showed." "Confirmed," Dr. Solis said from beside him, monitoring the silencer device that had been carefully installed aboard the ship over the past week. "If we can get within range and maintain the beam for at least 90 seconds, We believe we can overload their local coordination systems. 90 seconds, Ortiz repeated. In the middle of an alien fleet that outnumbers us more than 2 to 1. No pressure. Across the laser relay network, Elena Voss watched the unfolding situation from the Meridian station, unable to do anything now but wait and trust the plan that so many hands had built together over the past month. She had argued for hours about whether to be aboard the Wanderer's Hope herself, but in the end, her place was here, coordinating the wider defense, ready to relay whatever information came from the battle to the scattered forces still waiting across human space. The Threndel fleet, still confident in its overwhelming advantage, moved to intercept the small human force as it emerged from the shadow of the moon. Joran Kest, watching the human ships approach on his view screen, felt no particular concern. 17 ships, however brave their crews might be, stood no realistic chance against 40 warships equipped with weapons technology, centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. "Hold formation," he ordered. "Allow them to approach. We will demonstrate the futility of resistance clearly, so that when we offer terms afterward, they understand there is no alternative." It was, in the end, exactly the kind of overconfidence that Dessa Vrail had warned against weeks earlier, and exactly the kind of assumption that had allowed humanity's small, desperate fleet to close the distance without the aggressive defensive response that a more cautious commander might have ordered. As the human fleet closed within range, the Threndel ships opened fire, their weapons far more powerful than anything Earth's scattered defenses could match. 2 human ships were destroyed within the first minute of the engagement, their crews lost in flashes of light that Elena watched with a tight, controlled grief she could not afford to fully feel yet, not while the battle was still unfolding. But the human fleet did not retreat. Instead, following the plan they had spent 8 desperate days preparing, the remaining ships scattered in a chaotic, unpredictable pattern, making themselves difficult targets, while Captain Ortiz guided the Wanderer's Hope, shielded by the confusion of the wider battle, toward the heart of the Threndel formation. "We're close," Dr. Solis said, her voice tense as she monitored the ship's approach. 200 kilometers from their command vessel. We need to get within 50 to have any real chance of the silencer working effectively. "Working on it," Ortiz said, weaving the ship through the gaps between alien vessels, with a skill born from years of navigating far more physically dangerous obstacles in the asteroid belt. Weapons fire streaked past them on all sides, and twice the ship shuddered from near misses that came close enough to rattle every piece of loose equipment aboard. Aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, Dessa Vrail's instruments picked up something unusual amid the chaos of the battle. "Marshal, one of their vessels is breaking away from the main engagement pattern. It appears to be heading directly toward our position." Joran frowned, studying the readings. "A single ship, attempting to reach our flagship directly? That seems like a desperate and foolish maneuver." "Perhaps," Dessa said slowly, remembering the interference burst from a week earlier, remembering her own warnings about underestimating this species. "Or perhaps, it is exactly the kind of unconventional tactic we have already seen them use once before. Marshal, I recommend we intercept that vessel immediately, with full force." Joran hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Redirect 3 vessels to intercept. Do not allow it to reach effective range of our position." But the order came a fraction too late. As 3 Threndel warships broke formation to intercept the Wanderer's Hope, Captain Ortiz made a final, desperate maneuver, cutting the ship's engines and using the last of its forward momentum to carry it into range of the command vessel, close enough that Dr. Solis's hands were already moving to activate the silencer device before the alien ships could close the final gap. 50 kilometers, she said, her voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. "Activating now." The silencer device came online, its focused beam of disruptive energy lancing across the remaining distance to strike the Threndel command vessel directly. Aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, every screen, every system that relied on coordinated communication with the rest of the fleet, began to flicker and fail. "Marshal," Dessa's voice carried a note of genuine alarm now. "We are losing coordination signal with the fleet. Something is directly interfering with our local systems." Joran watched in growing disbelief as the carefully synchronized formation of his entire fleet, the product of centuries of refined tactical doctrine, began to fall into confusion. Ships that had relied on constant coordination from the flagship suddenly found themselves operating independently, their movements no longer synchronized, their combined firepower no longer focused with the precision that had made his fleet so effective across 100 prior conquests. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Fleet Marshal Joran Kest felt something that his species rarely experienced in the course of their long, successful history of conquest. He felt afraid. For 90 long seconds, the heart of the Threndel fleet fell silent. Aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, every system that depended on coordinated communication flickered and failed. Screens that had once shown the precise, synchronized positions of 40 warships now displayed only fragments of information, gaps of static, where clear data should have been. Fleet Marshal Joran Kest gripped the edge of his command console, watching centuries of tactical doctrine collapse in real time before his eyes. "Status report," he demanded, his voice sharper than it had been in years. "Unable to comply, Marshal," came the strained reply from a junior officer. "Our internal systems remain functional, but we cannot reach any other vessel in the fleet. Whatever this weapon is, it has completely isolated our command signal." Dessa Vrail worked frantically at her own station, trying every alternate channel and backup protocol her training had ever taught her, but the disruption was thorough and precise, cutting the flagship off from the rest of the fleet as cleanly as a blade severing a single thread from a woven cloth. "Marshal, without coordination, our fleet's response pattern is degrading rapidly. Individual ships are engaging the enemy without synchronized tactics. Several vessels appear to be firing on positions that no longer contain valid targets, based on outdated information." Joran understood immediately what this meant. His fleet, so carefully built around centralized command and perfect coordination, had never been designed to function well when that coordination failed. Every ship captain under his command had been trained to follow the flagship's lead, to trust the constant stream of tactical data flowing from the central command system, rather than to think and act independently. Without that stream of information, his fleet was not simply weakened. It was, for the first time in longer than Joran cared to remember, genuinely vulnerable. Outside, in the chaos of the battle, the remaining ships of humanity's small defense fleet, guided by Elena Voss's careful planning and the courage of crews who had spent a month refusing to accept defeat, took full advantage of the confusion. What had been a desperate, uneven fight only minutes earlier began to shift, not because humanity's remaining ships had grown stronger, but because the enemy's greatest advantage, its perfect coordination, had been stripped away in a single, decisive stroke. Aboard the Wanderer's Hope, still holding position dangerously close to the Threndel flagship, Captain Ortiz watched his instruments with a mixture of relief and disbelief as the silencer device continued its work. "It's holding," Dr. Solis said, her hands steady on the controls despite the danger surrounding them. "Their command ship is completely isolated. Look at the rest of their fleet. Their formation is falling apart." "Time to hold this position?" Ortiz asked, watching, as 3 Threndel warships continued their intercept course, close enough now that weapons range would soon be a factor. "As long as we can," Dr. Solis said. "Every second we hold this beam is another second their fleet spends confused and disorganized." The 3 intercepting Threndel ships opened fire as they closed the final distance, and Ortiz threw the Wanderer's Hope into a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed the old mining vessel far beyond anything it had ever been designed to endure. The ship shuddered and groaned under the strain, warning lights flashing across every console, but it held together, buying precious seconds that Elena's carefully coordinated defense fleet used to press their advantage against an enemy that no longer knew how to fight as one. On the Meridian station, Elena watched the battle unfold through the fragmented, delayed reports still trickling in from her scattered forces, her heart caught somewhere between hope and fear with every update. "Ortiz is still holding position," Chen reported, reading the latest relay message with visible relief. "The silencer is working. Their command ship's coordination signal has completely failed." "And our fleet?" Chen's expression grew more serious. "We've lost 4 more ships in the confusion, Commander. But without central coordination, the enemy's remaining vessels are making mistakes. Reyes reports that at least 6 Threndel ships have withdrawn from active engagement entirely, apparently unsure of how to proceed without instructions from their flagship." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every life lost in the battle, but also feeling, For the first time since the silence began a month earlier, a genuine sense that this fight might actually be winnable. "Tell Ortiz to hold as long as he can," she said. "But tell him if the ship starts to fail, he pulls back immediately. We've asked enough of that crew already." The message reached the Wanderer's Hope just as its outer hull began to show serious signs of strain from the sustained combat maneuvers. Ortiz read the order, glanced at his instruments, and made a decision that would later be remembered as one of the defining moments of the entire conflict. 90 more seconds, he said to his crew. "Then we pull back, whatever happens. Let's make them count." Aboard the vessel of quiet judgment, Fleet Marshal Joran Kest watched his fleet's disorganized struggle with a growing sense of horror that no amount of military training had prepared him for. In 100 prior conquests, his species had never faced an enemy capable of directly striking at the coordination systems that made the Threndel military machine so effective. Every prior victory had been built on the assumption that no target species could match, let alone exploit, the sophistication of Threndel command technology. "Marshal," Dessa said quietly, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been grim vindication beneath the urgency. "I believe we underestimated this species significantly. Their weapon does not simply jam communication. It appears to specifically target coordinated command signals, precisely the vulnerability I raised concerns about weeks ago." Joran did not respond immediately, watching the chaotic readouts of his failing formation, weighing options that had never before been necessary in the long, successful history of his command. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with a decision he had never imagined having to make. "Order a general withdrawal," he said. "All ships, disengage, and retreat to the fleet rally point, beyond the outer system boundary. We cannot continue this engagement, while our coordination remains compromised." "Marshal, a full retreat was not part of my plan." "No," Joran said. "But continuing to fight an enemy capable of dismantling our coordination at will, while our own command ship remains isolated and vulnerable, is not a risk I am willing to accept. We withdraw, we regroup, and we reconsider our approach to this species entirely." The order went out through whatever limited local communication remained available to the flagship, relayed ship to ship in a slow, imperfect chain that mirrored, in its own strange way, the very kind of decentralized communication that Elena Voss's resistance network had built over the past month. One by one, the Threndel vessels began to break off their attacks, forming a loose, hurried retreat that lacked the precise coordination the fleet had shown only an hour earlier. 90 seconds after Captain Ortiz made his decision to hold position, the silencer device's power reserves finally ran dry, and the beam of disruptive energy keeping the Threndel command ship isolated flickered and died. But by then, the damage had already been done. The Threndel fleet's confidence, built over thousands of years of unbroken success, had been shaken in a way it had perhaps never experienced before. "Pull back," Ortiz ordered his crew, and the battered Wanderer's Hope turned away from the alien flagship, retreating through the scattered remains of the battle toward the relative safety of Earth's orbit, its hull scarred, but its crew alive, having accomplished something that, only a month earlier, would have seemed impossible. The Threndel fleet withdrew fully from Earth's orbital space within the hour, retreating beyond the outer edge of the solar system, their jamming drones falling silent one by one as the fleet's coordinated network collapsed along with their battle formation. For the first time in over a month, Earth's skies, both literally and in terms of communication, began to clear. It was Chen who first noticed the change, sitting at his console on the Meridian station 3 hours after the battle's end, watching the readouts with an expression of dawning disbelief. "Commander," he said, his voice unsteady, "the jamming signal, it's gone." Elena crossed the room quickly, looking over his shoulder at the screen, where for the first time in over a month, standard radio frequencies showed clear, open channels rather than solid walls of interference. "Try a broadcast," she said. "Any frequency, see if it goes through." Chen's hands moved quickly over the console, and moments later, a message went out across every standard human communication band, a simple, unscripted statement that would later be remembered and repeated across the entire planet as the moment the crisis officially ended. "This is Commander Elena Voss, Earth Orbital Station Meridian, broadcasting on open channels. The jamming has stopped. We say again, the jamming has stopped. To everyone still listening, still fighting, Still holding on through this past month, we did it. Together, we found a way through the silence. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, signals began pouring back across every reopened channel, from cities around the world, from colonies on Mars, and stations throughout the solar system, from ordinary people who had spent a month believing they might never hear another human voice beyond their own small, isolated community again. Far beyond Neptune, aboard his retreating flagship, Fleet Marshal Joran Kest sat alone in his private quarters, reviewing the full data from the battle with a heaviness he had rarely felt in his long career. Dessa Vrail found him there hours later, standing quietly in the doorway until he acknowledged her presence. "Marshal, the High Council will want a full report on what happened here." "Yes," Joran said quietly. "They will. What will you tell them?" Joran considered the question for a long moment, thinking back over the past month, over every assumption he had carried into this campaign, assumptions built on 1,000 years of successful conquest that had never once prepared him for a species like this one. "I will tell them the truth," he said finally. "That we underestimated a species that refuses to accept silence as defeat, that we attempted to break them by cutting off their voice, and instead, we taught them to find new ways to speak, ways we never thought to watch for. I will tell them that humanity is not a threat to be dismissed, nor perhaps one to be conquered at all. I will recommend, strongly, that the Compact reconsider its approach to this world entirely." Dessa nodded slowly. "And if the High Council disagrees, if they order another attempt?" Joran looked up at her, his expression carrying the weight of a hard-earned lesson. "Then I hope, for the sake of whoever leads that attempt, that they take the time to study this species' history far more carefully than I did, because I do not believe humanity will ever again be as unprepared for silence as they were on the day we first arrived." Back on Earth, in the weeks that followed, humanity slowly rebuilt what had been lost, this time with a deeper appreciation for the fragile, precious nature of connection, and a new understanding of just how resourceful they could be when that connection was threatened. The old radio networks, the laser relays, the strange hybrid systems built from century-old technology and modern engineering, were not simply abandoned once the crisis ended. They were preserved, studied, and improved, a permanent reminder of what had been accomplished during humanity's darkest, most silent month. Commander Elena Voss stood once more in the communications bay of the Meridian Station, watching Earth turn steadily below her, its cities bright with restored power and reconnected networks, its people carrying on with the resilience that had carried them through the crisis. Beside her, Chen worked quietly at his console, monitoring the same channels that had once gone dark, now humming with the ordinary, precious noise of a species that had refused to be silenced. "Do you think they'll come back?" Chen asked, not looking up from his work. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "Maybe, maybe not. But if they do, they'll find a very different Earth waiting for them. One that knows exactly what it's capable of, even when everything seems lost." She looked out at the planet below, thinking of all the people, known and unknown, who had built something remarkable out of nothing but old technology, stubborn hope, and the simple, powerful refusal to accept silence as the end of the story. "Let them come," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We'll be ready. We always find a way to speak." Outside the station's windows, the stars continued their slow, silent turn, indifferent to the small, determined world that had just proven, against overwhelming odds, that even the deepest silence could not truly stop the voice of a species that refused to give up.